am live. I continue with chapter 3 of A Lot to Remember, a book by Joan Marshall Grant about her travels, largely through France. We are here in chapter 3, entitled Phantom Prisoner. While Denys and I were at Chaumont, we visited the chateau and were suitably impressed, except by the guide's assertion that the room, which communicates with Catherine de Medici's bedroom, her bedroom also has a door leading to the gallery of the chapel, was the personal apartment of her astrologer. She frequently resorted to purveyors of prophecies and poisons, but I very much doubt if she did so openly, and it is much more likely that she used the adjoining room as a boudoir. The word is derived from the French boudoir, meaning to sulk, where her consultants in the darker arts could approach discreetly by a private stair. After her husband's death, she gave Chaumont to Diane de Poitiers in exchange for Diane's favourite chateau of Chenonceau. This is usually considered to have been an act of deliberate malice, but I think it probable that Diane preferred to leave the place which was so poignantly associated with her years of happiness with her royal lover. She is supposed to have been virtually a prisoner in Chaumont, but in fact she stayed there only 6 weeks and then returned to her chateau of Annay on the Eure, where she is depicted in high relief over the gateway in the guise of the goddess Diana embracing a stag. At Chenonceau we found the vast parterre planted with a profluence of pansies, tens of thousands of them in violet blue or yellow, a masterpiece of bedding out, which must have needed an army of gardeners, although there was not a single one in sight. It would be tempting but illusory to imagine the lovely Diane gazing down at the limpid waters of the Cher from a window of the wing which spans the river, for this wing was added by Catherine. The most likely ghost, if in fact the place is haunted, would be the Louise de Vaudemont, the docile little window of Henry III, who lived there for 11 years, wearing the white mourning of queens, which caused her to be known as the White Lady. We had launched very indifferently at Amboise and then visited the chateau, mounting to the upper terrace by the spiral ramp which takes the place of a central stairway, and was designed so that the royal retinue could ascend without dismounting from their horses. It was a very hot day, and by the time I reached at the top of it, I wished that I either was or had a horse. However, the view from the great terrace is well worth the climb, and on the ramparts is the exquisite little chapel built by Charles VIII for Anne of Brittany. It is in this chapel that Leonardo da Vinci's bones have been reinterred, or the bones presumed to be his, which were found under the ruins of another chapel within the castle walls in which he was originally buried. It is from here that the guide points out the manor of Clos-Lucé, a gift to Leonardo from his royal patron, but it has been drastically restored, and only the chapel remains as he knew it. I enjoyed this second visit to Amboise much more than I had enjoyed my first, which was in midwinter when ice was stamping down the Loire in ochre slabs, which groaned and creaked together under my chilly bedroom window until it was only too easy to imagine that the sound was an echo of Huguenot corpses twisting and turning in the dark wind. But that was before Hitler's war and has no place in this story, so I will go back only 4 years at the time when Charles and I came to the Loire on our way to the Lot. We had intended only to spend the night at Langers, 15 miles downriver from Tours, but the cooking at the restaurant Duchesse Anne was so excellent, the family hotel to which it belonged so comfortable, that we decided to linger. It was probably this mood of happy greed which causes me still to see Aix-le-Rideau as rising slightly as a souffle from its swan moat. To reward Charles for also going cheerfully round Villandry-Blois, Cheminot, and Langers, we then went to Saumur, not to see the chateau, but so that he could drink at its place of origin one of his favourite wines. After lunch we left the town by D145 for the forest of Fontevraud, in which Solomon's seal was plentiful as bracken in an English wood, and glades were carpeted with lily of the valley. Fontevraud would have remained for me no more than a pleasant setting in which to walk off lunch, if we had not come to a high, forbidding wall, where a notice beside a pair of enormous iron gates curtly ordered, "Sonnez la guide." On a sudden hunch I obeyed, to regret it a moment later when one of the doors opened to reveal a sinister man in the uniform of a prison warder. I attempted to retreat, which made him look even more surly, and I was still wondering how to convince him that I was not trying to smuggle a hacksaw to an incarcerated chum by the time he was looking and barring the door behind us. We were now in a tunnel which, so thick were the outer walls, could easily have garaged a double-decker bus. "You will wait here until another warder comes to show you around," announced our gaoler. "Visitors are not allowed to circulate except under strict surveillance." The last thing I wanted to do was to see around the prison, and I said so. His eyes became even more glacial. "You must have wanted to see round the abbey, otherwise why did you ring the bell?" Before I could reply, he withdrew to his lair in the side of the tunnel, slammed the door, and stood staring malevolently through the battered window. A notice informed us that we were in the precinct of an abbey founded at the end of the 11th century, in which for 700 years, until Napoleon turned it into a civil prison, a community of both monks and nuns was ruled over by an abbess. Beyond the tunnel there was an open space of gravel flanked by curved walls, and at the far side a steel door in an even higher one. I crossed it to look at 3 rose bushes, for they were not cheerful either, being smothered with greenfly. So we sat disconsolately on a plank bench in the shade of the tunnel, until, after about a quarter of an hour, Charles tapped on the door of the gaoler's lair and asked how much longer we were expected to wait. The door opened a couple of inches to vent. 20 minutes, perhaps longer. Do not be impatient. and then slammed shut again before we could use the delay as an excuse to escape. I was far more uneasy than circumstances justified, and I told myself that I was restless only because I was bored. But my feeling intensified until I had to admit that there was a spook in the immediate vicinity. A spook in a French prison seemed only too probable, and it was the last thing I wanted to see. In an attempt to tune it out, I counted the paving stones, did sums in my head, tried to remember the number of all the roads we had been on since Le Havre, but none of these evasions were any use. Reluctantly, I had to accept the fact that something or someone who 5 minutes ago had been outside my range of perception was relentlessly coming into focus. Now I could see 3 dead men lying on the gravel near the right-hand wall. There was another man on the ground near them, but he was not dead, for he was trying to crawl. I could smell blood and cordite and fear. The stench of fear was sickeningly strong. With an effort, I jerked myself back and said urgently, "Get me out of here or I'll be sick." Charles is usually more than willing to help me dodge spooks, but he said that he felt there was a job here, which oh dear, I don't know when this stopped. Anyway, she is in this prison. With an effort, I jerked myself back and said urgently, "Get me out of here, I will be sick." Charles is usually more than willing to help me dodge spooks, but he said that he felt there was a job here which urgently needed doing. He already had a notebook open on the bench beside him, so I knew I must have been talking aloud instead of only seeing in silence. Trivial fears of being sick in public, of being arrested as a dangerous lunatic by the warder, of returning to find myself being stared at by a crowd of giggling tourists, dwindled as I accepted someone else's much deeper fear, which I must try to do something about. I shut my eyes and stared to see what had happened immediately before the men had been killed. But the scene was still impersonal, as though I were watching a colored film. I could hear myself talking, but it sounded unreal, as though it were being played back on a tape recorder. I can see 4 prisoners, French prisoners. One of them is quite young, the others are middle-aged, but none of them is the ghost. With them is a German guard, a boy of 19, with yellow hair and pale blue eyes. He's afraid of the prisoners, although he is armed with a machine pistol, and they have only wooden rakes. They are raking up straw and shavings which fell from the lorries which unload here. The Frenchmen are whispering to each other, loud whispers which they intend the German boy to overhear. They describe what will happen to Germans when the town is liberated. The boy tries to ignore them. He wants to shout at them to be silent, but he knows to do that would betray his fear. He is becoming hysterical with fear. A muscle is twitching in his left eyebrow, but none of the Frenchmen realize they are driving him too far for their own safety. Right, it's getting a little dark here. Therefore, I will pause this here and continue reading the 3rd chapter another time. Today's Friday.